Yo, what is going on, guys? Godrekton here today, bringing you a new video, and not just any new video, but I'm finally bringing out my new and latest guide to Renekton optimization in Season 13. So, where do we begin with all this stuff? I think this season has been really weird so far in terms of Renekton optimization, and I think there's not really many people been talking about what to build on Renekton either. And because there's no one really giving us a build direction on what to be playing on Renekton, a lot of Renekton players are left in a very confused mind state this season on how to be playing him. So as with items, like I said, a lot of people have been confused this season on what to buy, and this guide is basically for all those people that just want to try something different, maybe they just want to try a different playstyle, have different insights or perspectives on going certain items, and this guide will be able to achieve that for the rest of the season. What I also hope to do with this guide is I hope to kind of inspire people to try different stuff as well, because I personally believe that Renekton should not be built in one way. Throughout the years of Renekton's existence within this game, a lot of people have always tried building him in one way. As we know, people used to just build the classic Sunfire came into full tank in Season 2 onwards a little bit, up until Season 5 when it was like Cleaver, Ravenous Hydra into tank items. Then came to Season 6, 7, where it was like Cleaver Titanic, Sterix, or some other variation of tank items. And then later on for the seasons, we went to Goredrinker, Sterix, Death Dance. But with all these items getting consistently changed, nerfed, buffed, there's just a lot to really explain. But I think people have finally started to understand that there are many other playstyles that can be played. Full AD, a very successful playstyle, has finally started showing up in a lot more games. And not just any games, but even pro play. Yeah, pro players playing Prowler Bork, which is about time, considering that this playstyle has been very strong ever since the release of Mythic items. And being that I kind of maybe innovated towards that and gave like a lot of insight on the build, it's kind of cool seeing that a lot of people are now building this these items and going this playstyle. But I still think a lot of people need to really work on the Prowler Bork game, because a lot of people are still playing it like normal Renekton. But the thing with normal Renekton is you don't play that like full AD, and that's something I do want to also touch into in another video. But for the sake of this video, it's more or less explaining all the types of playstyles when going certain mythic items, which then I'll explain going into very large depth into the reason why we build them, talk about their strengths, weaknesses, their usage, strategy, and so much more. So what I'm hoping to achieve with this guide is basically giving you guys all my itemization knowledge that you will need to know if you're going to be playing Renekton, and also to master him towards a higher level within Season 13. But without further ado, let's begin. Now, I know my profile does say Diamond 2, a little bit of a rough start so far in the season, but I am working towards back to Master Tier. And I've been kind of like trying to find my own like build, or like trying new things as well. So a lot of my gameplay is kind of in that stage right now. And with a lot of my testing and stuff within the season so far, I've kind of like found a lot of builds, also with the help of 3-in-1 Warrior that has been teaching me some new builds as well, and playstyles. That's also something I do want to be getting into. And I might even make another video too on a playstyle itself, because I think it's very worth talking about towards the Renekton community. So let's begin with the items. So here I have a bunch of different item categories, and the whole idea of this is I'm going to like obviously timestamp them, talk a lot about all these like starts and like all the ideologies and when we build certain things. So we have starting items, boots, some rush items where we like rush one item with an explanation as to why we do. We then have item combos here, which I'll be talking into separately as well. Then I'll be explaining the item components that we can build on Renekton. And then I'll be talking about some options versus AD, magic damage, and then some items that I also think are overrated and that I don't really recommend. But within this guide, let's begin with starting items. So this is a very important thing that I don't think is talked well enough within champion main communities, and especially Renekton, being that you can build pretty much every item in the game. I think it's really important to understand why we're building an item too. Like, there's not enough context on why certain players build certain things. Like, you see players go D-Shield exclusively, you see some just go Longsword free, some go refillable, but it's like, why did they do that? And like, with that question being said, I do want to go into a lot of detail now why we do these certain things. The first thing that I do want to cover is actually Longsword free potions. This is probably Renekton's most classic start, I would say. Longsword is such a great item because you can pivot this item into literally any build that you want to. A longsword will build out a Prowler's Claw, it'll build out of Eclipse, Bork, Cleaver, Goredrinker, you name it, a longsword is involved. And longsword not only does give this path for Renekton to easily rush into an item, but if you do get that great start where you're snowballing already, you get first blood, you can build a Dirk with this, a Vamp Scepter, Core Fields, like the options are just kind of endless, and they all lead into an item that gives Renekton a huge power spike. So on paper, when you compare with all the other items, Longsword 3 is super good on a champion like Renekton. Not only because of what it can do, but with Renekton's kit and how it works, Renekton likes to have all-in type trades, really bursty combos. The free potions help out with that as well, being that they give 125 health every time we go in. So it's a really perfect option for, trading patterns as well. We go in, pop a potion, do a combo, disengage. Next combo is typically our all-in finish combo. And with that, our little potions also help us, kind of just prepare for those type of fights. Not only is it good for that too, but it's also very good just due to the fact that if we are in a lane where we're getting poked early, we might not be strong till level 3. These 3 potions kind of give us a little bit of leeway to kind of take a bit of damage and then look for the level 3 that we need to finish our opponent. So it's very safe, it's very calculated too. There's a lot of versatility with how we can play Longsword 3 potions. Not only is it aggressive, but it's also very defensive too, in the way that we have more potions and health than any other build that we're going to be starting on Renekton. The next thing that I do like about it too is that because it is 10 AD, it is also kind of fueling our high AD playstyle too within the early game. As a lane bully, we like to be very aggressive, we like to do a lot of risky trades and all stuff like that, and it's all going towards that. The 10 AD can be very it can give us a lot of raw power, which allows our Empower W to do more damage. It allows our Q healing to go up just a little bit more. Might not be a lot, but it's still something, right? Our E damage, Q damage, it all works in towards us having a lot more damage. And that's what I really like about the Longsword 3 start too. However, if we are talking about cons with this start, I don't really like the fact that we don't really have a lot of health. But again, if you're good enough as a player to use your potions properly, the fact that we have no health compared to the other Doran starts is that we can kind of bypass that. It's not really a problem. It's like invisible health. Having these potions gives us a lot of health to work with. It's 360 health we're getting or something like that. And all that health is still bigger than any other potion Start would get. Because obviously if we compare potions here, we get 120 here. 120 per pot. We only get 1 pot per every item start too. So with Doran's Blade, we're only going to get an extra 120. With Longsword, it's 360. Refillable is only 200 health. So, it's kind of good in its own right, as long as you know how to use it. And that itself is also a skill and something players need to practice too when they do go this kind of start. Let's talk about the next item start, Doran's Blade. Now, Doran's Blade is a pretty stable start. So if you're a new player of Renekton, or you're playing a matchup, or maybe something you're not so strong at, Doran's Blade is a really good alternative because it gives you 80 health, it gives you, 1 pot still, which is 120 worth. You do get some Omnivamp 2.5, which works on your auto attacks and your abilities for a little bit extra healing, and you get 8 AD. So the whole start is very, well statted. So in matchups where you need those extra stats, maybe against a Jax, maybe a Fiora, early game, just to stat check and play with Conqueror, I think it's a really good item. So if people that do playing Conqueror, I think it's a really strong start for you because it gives you a lot of extra stats to work with. And the more stats you have over your opponent, the more likely you are going to be winning within the early game. Of course, we still need to play a little bit smart though. It's not like Longsword where we can afford to do a bit of extra risky trades. So we do need to use that potion really carefully. But obviously with the extra stats and stuff too, it does give us in itself more leeway too. The only con is that if you are snowballing with this, you're not really going to get that really big start where you first back a Dirk or something similar to that nature. So it can kind of delay us in that way as a con, I guess. But other than that, it's not really that bad. It's pretty decent. But like I said, I think if you're choosing between a Longsword and D-Blade, I think if you're really confident about the matchup you're playing, Longsword is definitely really better in comparison to D-Blade. And I think the more experience level you have on Renekton and you're comboing, I think Longsword 3 is only going to be more helpful for snowballing and also asserting a lead. However, if there is a matchup you're struggling with, and maybe you want those extra stats early and you're playing with a Conqueror specifically, I think D-Blade is actually a really strong contender, which probably beats the Longsword 3 if you're also going Conqueror. I think Longsword's definitely better at press the attack too, if we value it in a way of snowballing and doing quick combos and playing off potions more too. And the last option is Doran Shield. Doran Shield is super OP, and however, with the making of this video too, I only learned that today that they are nerfing D-Shield as well next patch. So the health regeneration from this item is going from 6, I think, per sec. What's the stat? Like 6 healing regen to like 4. And that's pretty impactful, but as an item overall, it's still going to be our go-to for poke matchups. So the way we play D-Shield is that we take this into our really hard counter matchups. Think of Quinn, Vayne, Action, maybe a Jace, Teemo, anything that's statistically counter Renekton within the past or currently is a super good item for these type of matchups. So if you're ever struggling against any poke matchups, this is basically a no-brainer. You could argue Longsword 3 is giving you more sustain. However, there's a lot more room for it to go wrong, and I think the innate sustain from D-Shield and second wind combo in runes is super broken. And it's our way of basically getting to level 3 and then starting to like open up on trades. Like, it's a super safe item, and I think if you're really good enough to use the item properly, like against poke, you're not taking unnecessary damage, it's still super strong even after the nerfs. Like, I just think it's basically a free win too if you build this item. Every hard match that I play against in like Quinn, like Vayne and all that, going D-Shield basically wins me the lane. Like, I'm confident already in my comboing ability, and if I could just keep my health up and sustain, the D-Shield is coming in super clutch. And when I get to those power spikes in level 3, my first back, level 6, I'm basically just going to kill these champions. And it is all help to the D-Shield too, because it helps me sustain early, and then it helps me have enough health to farm up, get XP, and then I'm not really getting into any more trouble either. So overall, if we just talk about the starting items, I think Longsword 3 is super good if you're confident in your snowballing ability and you want more potions to play around with in certain matchups. Matchups where like, you're going to be fighting a lot and playing off your E, like think of a Darius or some kind of like bruiser matchup. I think it's really good for that. I would say D-Blade is really good if you're playing Conqueror more often and you want to get like more calculated and specific trades. Like if you're doing auto-attack Q trades or something of that nature, I think a D-Blade's going to work out pretty well. Like really slow trades, like playing really smart, definitely really good for that. And I think D-Shield is also really good if you just want to sustain early game and just kind of coast the early laning phase and then scale into like beating these other champions that we're playing against. So overall, there's not really a long start here, but I do also want to talk about the refillable potion real quickly. I do see some people take this with Longsword earlier on, but I just don't think it's really that good, in all honesty. Like, I think we can save a little bit of gold, but 200 health in some matchups is not really great, like, for potions, because what if a trade goes wrong? If we take the wrong trade or something out of our control happens, we're going to run out of potions really quickly, and then we don't really have anything else to work with. And that extra potion can be the difference in allowing us to win a fight or allowing us to survive. So I usually just lean more into Longsword 3, like, as a stable purchase for me. The only time I buy a refillable is on first back or just below 7-minute mark. Because potions do help. They can help us, you know, come back, and before sub 7 minutes, like, the potions obviously make a big difference in combat ability with health regen. And I think that's like a perfect time to buy it too. So anywhere before 7 minutes I think is good, but as a starting item, I don't think it is good. So that is basically my opinion on the starting items as a whole. The next items I want to talk about now are boots. When it comes to boots, it's not really a knowledge about like what Renekton necessarily like wants, but just like what you want to build towards like the game itself. So when you think of boot choices, you typically want to like think for the game itself, because these are what kind of play a pivotal item depending on like how the game's gonna go. Meaning that if you buy your still player caps, it's gonna be super good against AD or on it champions. Merc Treads are gonna be good against CC, and like maybe Boot Spin is good against slows. Like just to generally sum it up, right? But if we talk about each boots individually, I'll explain when you want to buy each of them. So as I just pointed out, played Steelcaps or Ninja Tabby, whatever you want to call these boots, because these days I just call them anything. But let's just say, I don't know, red boots. I like to color code them as well. I think red boots are pretty good typically into AD and champions that are really good on him. So in your like bruiser, fire matchups, like people, or like just any like fed AD like champions on any team or general, If there's anything that just like has a lot of melee attacks or like range, these are a perfect option to build. So when we consider things like a Jax, Fiora, even a Renekton, if you wanted to play against, if you're playing against Renekton, these boots are going to do a massive amount of work because the passive, which reduces 12% of attacks. Now, when it says attacks, that means basic attacks and abilities that use auto attacks. Like Renekton W is one of them, a Jax W, a Kog'Maw W, anything that has some kind of like enhancement to an auto attack. That's where the passive will cut 12% off of that, as well as every other basic attack. So don't just consider these boots good against attack damage champions, but also consider them really good against AP ones too that are on hit. So like I said, a Kog'Maw, a Diana, anything that's primarily auto attacking, this is going to cut off a percentage of that damage, whether that's like AP or AD. So to sum it up, build these against any on hit or AD champions. Next we have Mercury Treads. Mercury Treads are kind of I think a lot of people have the wrong idea when to build these. Now, these boots are definitely good when you're playing against full AP comp, because again, you're getting a bit of magic resist, but you don't build it for magic resist. That's the problem people kind of think about. Well, this is just like the misconception people have, like when buying these boots. They tend to buy it against people that just are full AP, or like they're against an AP laner, when in reality, that's not why you're buying them. So let me give you an example. Imagine we're playing against a Diana. Diana is a auto attack based champion with lots of magic damage built into her kit, a form of abilities and her auto attacks. If we were to rush the Mercury Treads, it does work against her AP damage. However, with her damage also being spread out with a lot of auto attacks, I feel like the played Steelcaps would do a lot more work than the Merc Treads itself. So you kind of want to build preferably for the enemy team, like comp. Is it like heavy AD comp, on-hit comp, range comp, CC comp? That's the things you need to be thinking about when buying these boots. Now with Merc Treads, these are typically wanting to get purchased when you're against a lot of CC, like crowd control type champions. So when we're going to a game, think of things like we go against, in terms of top lane, maybe like a Maokai or something like hard CC, then there's like a Leona, Nautilus, Elise. Like these are champions where like these boots are going to come in really handy because you can break out their CC. The little bit of magic resist will help. Not that it's a big factor here, but more so the tenacity is what we're looking towards. So anything with a high stun rate, slow rate, taunt fear, you name it. As the item shows here, this is when we want to be building this item. So build it into heavy crowd control comps. Next, we have Ionian Boots. These boots are your snowballing choice of boots. So in a game where AD champs aren't really a problem, or on-hit damage, or there's like a lack of CC, and you're super fed, I think the Ionian Boots are a really good choice here because they save gold from our other boot purchases, as we can see here. 1,100 and 950, you know, we save some gold there. It also works towards giving us more ability haste for the lane, or just the time of game, so we're able to have a more frequent ability usage. And with how these boots work, they also like cut down our summoner spells cooldown as well, which is really impactful. So things like a flash, ghost, ignite, these will all go into a lower cooldown, and this plays a giant factor in also snowballing more often and having more ways to impact the game too, with our summoners being up more often. So typically, get these boots when there's not really a need for building the other boots when you're so far ahead, or maybe the enemy just doesn't have a comp that can deal with you. These are a really great choice with a Bork Prowler build, for instance. Next, we have Boots of Swiftness. These boots I don't really think are so good anymore, but they are a choice nevertheless. I just think in most circumstances, a Mercury Treads will probably outweigh the use of a Boots of Swiftness just because the duration of slows gets cut by the tenacity, while this only cuts down the movement slow from the abilities. So when you think of an Ashe, right, she'll obviously perma slow you with her build, maybe. Boots of Swiftness help you just being able to go against that, but you're still getting slowed, and it's not really helping as much. Like, you're still going to get kited regardless. Now, Merc Treads help more often, just in this scenario, because if you did get ulted by Ashe, you break out a bit faster, because that's a hard CC. And then the duration of her W, I think it's a W, gets cut down as well. So overall, I think Merc Treads will be better in that situation. And that's why I don't think Boots of Swiftness are really that good anymore, and I do feel like they should be reworked. However, if you like building them and you want that extra little bit of moon speed, or maybe there is a comp where there's lots of slows, maybe you can build this, but I don't think it's ideal in the in the slightest to really build these, in my opinion. to conclude the boot purchases, I think that anywhere between plated Steelcaps and Mercury Treads are typically the best. And then if you're snowballing, build Ionian Boots to just kind of enhance your snowballing. And that's really about it. I think these three are the best choices in most games. Now, let's talk about rush items. So, rush items are a really big question on Renekton. A lot of questions that I get asked are, when do I rush Iron King? When do I go Eclipse? When do I go Goredrinker? When do I go Prowler? When do I do any of this stuff? Well, this is where I'm going to explain it all now and kind of pin down when it's the best choice to be building them. So first of all, let's talk about the healing reduction items in Executioner's Calling and Bramble Vest. These two items, most of the time, you don't really have to build if you're playing Ignite on Renekton, because Ignite basically gives you a free Grievous Wounds, gives you 40% Grievous Wounds, and also it's really good for all-ins. Typically when we are fighting on Renekton, we either do a normal trade, which whittles our enemy's health down, and then we go in with an all-in trade with the Ignite. That typically like works and helps us like kill our opponent. However, there are some games where maybe we're behind, and this healing reduction could help. Or maybe there's a matchup like Warwick, where having one of these items is going to substantially impact the lane in a positive way for us, which allows us to have more winning opportunities against him. Not that it entirely helps, because the champion's broken in its healing, but it adds towards something, and when you have like a jungler helping or some other teammate, it is very impactful in stopping their 1v2 potential. So getting over these items is really good regardless in a situation like that. But when do we really get these then? So if we're not playing an Ignite playstyle, or we do just want to have like more impact with our healing reduction and lowering the enemy sustain, an Executioner's Calling is going to be really good here. Bramble Vest is better if the enemy is auto-attacking a lot. Now, the thing that I don't like about Bramble Vest, right, is that a lot of enemies can actually negate the Bramble Vest. And it's same with like enemies building into Renekton too. A lot of champions will think that Renekton's going to auto-attack, then Q. Now, that can be a thing, but all Renekton needs to do is just Q, and then he gets his full healing, and then, like, if he auto-attacks, it gets lowered afterwards. But that's the thing. There's many champions that can just simply bypass the healing reduction from Bramble Vest and, you know, just keep all their healing and not be impacted by it. So I think it's really a big bait purchase. Now, the armor can be helpful, but I don't think it's that great. It's a lot better against a champion that does, like, heal solely off auto-attacks. Warwick would be one of them, but you do have to consider that he has a Q too, which heals a lot. And typically, I think going the Executioners would be a lot better. And he also does a lot of magic damage, so the armor's not going to really be that helpful here either, in fairness. So typically, most of the time, I'd rather go the Executioner's Calling because it gives 15 AD. And with the changes to this item, it can also go into a Mortal Reminder later, which now gives 30% armor pen, which is definitely really strong, as well as the crit damage, AD. Like, it's just another good item to have if you don't want to go Shirelda and you still want to keep healing reduction while being like very snowbally. So it's a really good snowball item too. So typically between these two items, I think Executioners is good if you're even or ahead. And maybe Bramble Vest is better when you're behind against like an AD comp with healing. So it is also something to consider. Next, let's talk about the rush items. So starting with Blade Ruin King. Blade Ruin King is probably the best item you can rush on Renekton. So the way Blade the Ruin King works for Renekton is that the Mist Edge passive procs 3 times on Renekton's W, which is 12% current health. And when you consider that on Renekton's W, that's 36% current health damage on an ability, which is why it is so devastating against any bruisers, fighters, tanks, you name it. This item nukes anyone you play against. Even ADCs, they just cannot keep up with Renekton's damage. This is why you simply rush the item. The stat line is super good too. The 40 AD is very impactful for Renekton's abilities. The 25% attack speed. Attack speed's another good stat on Renekton because it allows you to build Fury faster. Allows you to get more life stealing from the 8% life steal too, which we'll talk about as well, which is also really good. It's good for auto attack weaving, like auto attack, spell, auto attack. Animation cancelling too for your Q cancels or just your autos in between abilities and cancelling over the rest of them. Like, it's just such a great item. The only thing that isn't so good, ideally, is the components. But you can basically build a pickaxe first, and then go into like a Vamp Scepter or a Curve Bow, and then eventually get into the Blade Ruin King. But most of the time, when you're deciding on a component, definitely get the pickaxe first. I think it is more impactful for the 25 AD, and it's also cheaper. You can end up buying like another component like boots or a refillable potion, cloth armor, whatever you might need for the early game. So typically, when you're going the Blade Ruin King, definitely get pickaxe as a priority item. I definitely think it's a lot better than Vamp Scepter. I think it kind of outweighs it. Now, when you look at 900 gold, it looks really good with the 15 attack damage, 7% lifesteal. But I just think it's a really weird component too, because if things do start going wrong, we can't really pivot into anything else. Going the pickaxe lets us pivot into all these items you see here. Like a Swike Whip, again, into Bork, maybe a Team if you want to play. There's just a lot of things you do, even like more Mortius too, if you're against like an AP matchup where things are going wrong. So typically, it's a good safe item to get as well, and it's just really cheap as well for what it is. And 25 AD, you can't really complain about that. But talking more about the Blair Ruin King, this item basically counters everyone. If there's a tank matchup, Bork is really good as well, into things like a Shen, Sion, Maokai, Ornn, you name it, anything like that. It is also such a super good item into Bruiser champions. Set, Darius, Jax. Jax you have to play a lot more smart with. I mean, just in general, you have to play smart with the Blair Ruin King, but it is also an item that kind of wins you the lane for free because you're inherently countering any champion that's building health. A lot of champions that build Sunderer, Sunfire, Cleaver, Goredrinker, anything that gives health early game, you are countering with the passive. So it is just such a good power spike item. And not only is it just good for, you know, the early game as well, or like later on the game, but just the scaling aspect too. People stereotype Renekton as being a champion that cannot scale. But with Blair Ruin King, that changes everything. Just because your damage carries over throughout the game, because it is based on how much health people are building. And you're dealing up to, you know, their current health damage. So you're just nuking anyone basically that's building lots of health. So overall, when we're talking about this item is super good against anyone. It's a really good rush item. It's really safe. You can pivot into any other build. You could go Eclipse. You can go Prowler's Claw, Goredrinker. You name it. You can build anything after this item. It is such a good item overall. So it's like definitely an S tier item. However, the cons with this item is definitely the build path, you could say. There is a lot of gold in 1,000, you know, gold recurve bow, 900 gold Vamp Scepter, 875 pickaxe. It's not like you can just spam longswords and then have like consistent damage. And when games start going wrong and maybe you misplay, building into that first iron Bork can be really devastating and very, very hard. So you have to make sure you're playing really careful, you're playing really smart, you don't die to ganks, you don't give away any gold. You want to just be solely focusing on this item. And once you have this item, you can go for any type of fight you want because you have that damage and that power to completely 1v1 anyone at that point in the game. So with all that being said, Blair Ruin King, very good. But what if we didn't want to go Blair Ruin King? What if we're too squishy? What if we don't like what the item's doing for us early game? What if we just want to be a little bit more tankier? Well, that's where we can go a Black Cleaver too. Black Cleaver is kind of an experimental choice in my rush items because I feel like on paper, this item right now is just super great for a bruiser. Think about it. 50 AD, 400 health, 30 ability haste. You get moon speed off every minion kill or just attacking in combat. You have up to 35% armor pen reduction with stacks up to 6. Like this item has everything and it's 3,100 gold. That's 200 gold less than your Bork, Goredrinker, like any type of like bruiser styled item. So you have all these stats and it's, I don't know what the gold efficiency is, but it's like really strong right now. Like, and it's just got buffed again recently. And I think when you compare it to a Goredrinker as well, especially first item, I think it actually beats the Goredrinker. And here's kind of why, right? So we have 30 haste, and this gives us 20 haste. Now, we do gain, like, 3 haste on the passive, but obviously that's throughout the game. And with it being nerfed as well, like, over the years, months, like, the item's haste output isn't as good as it used to be. And most Renekton items, anyways, are giving a lot of haste to him. So it's not like it's really that impactful having 20 compared to 30. And for an ability caster like Renekton, the haste is really good too. And I guess that's what you can say about Blair Ruin King too. Without having no haste early game, you're really solely relying on all-ins rather than like sustained trades. Having the 30 haste allows us to spam more abilities. Therefore, we're able to fight more often and just be a lot stronger in 1v2s and skirmishes as well. Especially with AD junglers too, which is typically where I think this item purchase could be really good if you're planning to play Black Cleaver Rush. So more about the item. This item's really good against basically any bruiser, good against tanks. Like, it's super good for these type of champions because you're lowering their armor output, which most bruisers and tanks have high armor scalings. You have lots of AD to fight them. The cooldown reduction helps. A lot of champions also have low cooldowns on you, but having this kind of like changes the tides and you're able to get more abilities off. And playing with a Conqueror as well, you're having like lots of AD, little innate healing too from the rune. Like, you just get a lot out of this. And again, for team fights and skirmishes, the armor shred is going to be helpful too. So people trying to counter you or your team comps where you're probably heavy AD, this item can like come in really clutch for that. So overall, I think it's a pretty strong item. The only thing I dislike about this, really, or like a couple dislikes, is that it doesn't really have an active. So you don't have burst power with this. You don't have burst power, but you have sustained fighting power, which is different. It's a different kind of power. Some games you want that burst power, some games you want sustained like trading abilities. So into things like a tank, like an Ornn Shen, this time will probably be outperforming Bork earlier on in the game, just because you're a lot tanking, you can take more risky fights. And pair this with the empowered E, you're shredding so much armor off someone. So all that armor a tank is building against you, it gets completely nullified. And it can do anyways if you use empowered E to begin with. So you might not even need the Cleaver. But what I'm saying is, if you go do both of these things, you're basically destroying any tank. So it is definitely worthwhile a consideration if you want to try it out. If you're a Bruiser player, maybe this is the item that you needed to make your playstyle a lot better. And I guess the other thing too, if we compare it to like a Goredrinker, we don't have like healing passive or any healing like type benefits, but that's completely fine. Anyways, because I think Goredrinker, like the healing aspect of this spikes a lot more later on when there's like a lot more people around you to use the active. Omnivamp, I mean, it's okay, but it's not the greatest stat in the world either. I think when you also compare it in that aspect, and also the damage values, and like long-term what it's doing, I think Cleaver is still doing more too. Yes, you get 55 AD, and you get like an active out of it, like to do extra damage, but you don't have Armor Shred. And the Armor Shred is what allows us to do more damage in the first place, because we're already carrying a lot of AD. So typically, I do think it's a lot stronger than Goredrinker, just in that aspect too. Another strength that I forgot to point out too is the build components. The build components are great here. Lots of longswords, a Kindle Gem. Like, this item is perfect if you just want to rush into a really strong early game. Bork is really strong too, but the problem is that it's not going to go good if you're behind. And the thing with Black Cleaver, right, is that if you do fall behind, you still can afford all your components easily. Having 2 longswords can help get into that core fields faster. You can buy a Kindle Gem, which is really cheap, 400, into another 400, another longsword, and then voila, you get your Black Cleaver ready. So I do think it's a pretty good choice if you just want to try something different and you don't want to try Goredrinker too. Next, we have the Goredrinker. So I guess in comparison to Cleaver, I'm a little bit biased towards Cleaver as being a better bruiser rush item. However, I do think this item could still be decent, especially against squishier champs. Having that health and a little bit of extra healing and stuff early game can help you stat check squishier champions on paper with Conqueror. Active can be a little bit helpful in the 1v2s. But again, I think if you're playing like in a high elo and like going for skirmishes, I think the Cleaver might be better. But yeah, Goredrinker may be in the opposite of that. Like, you can probably have a better chance against some fighter champions until they outscale you because you didn't go Blair Rune King early against a Sundero champ on a Fiora or Jax. Other than that, I think Goredrinker, I guess it's okay. It's just a bit more gold. But it's like, I think it's past its best. It's a lot weaker than it used to be. And I think it's definitely time for people to also see the usage out of a Cleaver compared to this as a first item. Goredrinker is definitely better later on when we already have a lot of CDR and health in our kit. But as a first item, I definitely think it's not as good as Cleaver. So I think after talking about both of them, I think I'll just leave it as that. I think Godrekton is good against squishies and if you want to stat check. But if you're looking to fight tanks or have more power over like people, like completely disregarding tank builds and having like a shred in like a Cleaver, helping with your AD jungler, I think Cleaver's the winner in these 2 items, depending on which you go first. The next item I want to talk about is Eclipse. Eclipse is a new item that a lot of people have been questioning with me lately. A lot of questions are like, why are you going Eclipse? Is it better than Prowler's Claw? Is it broken? Is it super good on Renekton? Now, the best way to put Eclipse is that it's only good as well as the player is. This item is either so rewarding or it's so like negatively impactful towards your gameplay, whereas you really need to consider like what you're doing is correct of it. So what do I mean with that? In my testing with Eclipse, I felt like this item was just super, it was either super strong or it was super weak. Now what made it super strong was the trading ability. Compared to like our other items, this item specifically gives us so much laning power in the early game. Simply that if we rush this, we have so much power. Like, it's so easy to build too. When we click on this, we get a bunch of longswords, a Dirk, core fields. All this gives us a lot of AD and snowballing potential. So if we get that first blood, going straight longswords into our Eclipse is making our laning insane. Especially against like basically everyone. But the only problem is that if I went a Prowler's Claw with this build and built into a tank, I still wouldn't feel like I have the damage, and a lot of armor that the enemies build against me, or health, would feel like it's just kind of nullified and it isn't as strong. That's where Eclipse kind of changes that, because it already has an armor pen shred passive based on how many items I have, which is obviously more impactful later on in the game. But the max health that we're having with this item helps us tremendously, along with the shield. The cooldown being 6 seconds now from 8 before. It does not have lifesteal anymore, but the ability to have more haste allows this item to like feel a lot stronger too. My problem before with Eclipse was that it didn't have any haste, so it just felt super awkward. A hit and run item that relies on my cooldowns being lower to like abuse this, you know, it just didn't make any sense to me like to build this, because I didn't have any haste along with it. But with the recent changes to give 15 haste now, it does make a giant difference, as well as it being 6 seconds. So every little trade we do, we get a shield and we can disengage. Not only is it just good for the short trades and like the fast combos, but the fact that we're getting moon speed too allows our E speed to also be faster. So if you think of it like this, you could do a EQ auto trade, like W, auto E, and then your second E, if you time it all right, will have the moon speed effect, which allows us to disengage faster. Into matchups like a Darius or someone that can like use an ability and punish us, this is tremendously impactful to taking less damage overall. So with that said, we have a lot of burst damage all at once, but that's where it's also a problem too, I feel like. This item is super good at just quick trades and hit and run style like comboing, or just if we can like do long fights and keep proccing the active. Now if we want to burst someone, it doesn't feel as good as a Prowler's Claw. That's because our damage is so front loaded, where the rest of our combo will be feeling a bit empty. We don't have consistent percentage damage from a Prowler's Claw active or a Bork, and that's where Eclipse can kind of like seem to dip, and why our trades can still like feel a little bit weird and inconsistent. And I think the mindset you need compared to like shifting from Prowler's style to Eclipse is that you need to play it like a hybrid high damage bruiser. You don't play to burst people, you play to technically like whittle them down, you know. It's like being a boxer. Think of Prowler's Claw as a one-shot like item. A Prowler's Claw could be like some kind of, I don't know, Mike Tyson left hook. You knock people out instantly with this. But the thing is, you need to play it really perfect and get the right trade. But you can just, you know, knock out your opponent instantly if you land it, right? Eclipse is more of a like sustained fighting item. So a boxer that wants to like use a lot of body shots to weaken the enemy, and then we go for our kill all in and like, I don't know, do another body shot and they like get him down, or like throw a right hand, you know? Like, you see where I'm going with this? Like, this item is completely different. And this gives us better team fighting power, I feel like, too, in the aspect that we can consistently proc it. We can use it in some kind of way to be, just to get, like, you know, extra damage out. Prowlers is just kind of like a one use, and you want to one-shot somebody. So, I guess the strengths here is it's a super good laning item. It can help us 1v2 if we use the active properly. And when we're, like, fighting under tower, it is super good for that, because we can time every trade with the tower shots. So, a simple auto-attack Q. We can proc the Eclipse 6% max health damage, and then we can take the tower shot with our shield if we micro properly. So this is just a super strong laning item, like a lane kingdom item. But when it comes to like later on fighting side lane, we need to be very careful with that too, because there are some champs that can beat us, but even like when a lot of people come, we can't really just nuke someone too. We have to kind of like time our fights properly and like just take the right fights till we can like make use of it. So you have to kind of hold your abilities a lot more. And also, like, use them, like in a certain way, too. Like, to keep proccing the active. You don't want to blow everything off all at once. So, if you ever played Sunder before, it kind of feels like that, but we have more damage. And it's, like, a lot better for Renekton. Another pro that I forgot to also mention originally with Eclipse as well is that compared to Blair Ruin King 2, Bork is another item that is, like, great for all-ins as well. But the difference is that you're very squishy. And Eclipse makes you less squishy, but you're unable to have burst fights. Like, burst trades, let's say. So against tanks, like, Eclipse would be better for the all-in, but Bork would be better for the all-in, and Eclipse would be good for, like, just consistent trades, like, getting them down. So this item is superb against tanks in comparison to Bork, I feel like. The only problem is that against fighters, or later on in the game when you need to one-shot someone, this item is a lot harder to pivot into a build that makes it work. You'd have to go, like, Eclipse, Bork, Cleaver, and the mid-game playing with Bork to Eclipse could be, Eclipse to Bork could be really hard too, so just keep it in consideration too when you want it. Like, there's going to be some matchups where it's really good. There's going to be some matchups where it's really bad too. Some matchups, you just need that burst against a champion. And others, you can go for those consistent trades and like end up winning your lane really hard and being a lot safe too. Things like Shen feel a lot easier with Eclipse. Things like an Urgot, well, Bork feels a lot better than Eclipse, in my opinion. So at the end of the day, it's just whatever you're really going for with the item. Like whether or not you want to make it work. So in conclusion, I think Eclipse is like a different playstyle altogether. If you're like a good bruiser player, and you're good at holding your abilities and making sure you're good at using the micro aspect of proccing the passive, it is super good for that. Now, it's not good for one-shotting. It's not good for, you know, it's still not like a good frontline item. It's just a good, like, offensive item as a bruiser if you're ahead. So that's, like, how I'll kind of, like, conclude this item. So moral of the story, it is a good hit-and-run item, and it's good just for consistent fighting. So against tanks, certain champions where you're waiting for abilities to come up and, like, using the active, it is super good against that. So last but not least, let's talk about Prowler's Claw. This is another S tier item where I feel like you can basically build this any game. However, I'll always consider saying that if you're going to rush Prowler's Claw, it's a lot better against squishy champions and ranged champions. Just because you can instantly get into range and one-shot them, compared to every other item on our rush item list here. The only thing that Prowlers isn't really good for is going against like tanks or bruisers, I'd say. Because they build a lot of armor and HP, or like an item that's like makes them a lot tankier and do damage, it feels really weak against them. It's superb against people that are like squishy, but against these people that are like a lot beefier, we end up like not being able to kill them with the passive, and then that leaves us with no extra damage to really deal with them. So that's where like going by a Ruin King would help with that. And that's why a lot of people also go Bork into Prowler's Claw, just because of the versatility that gives us, and the fact that once we get to mid-game, we're super strong, we have our scaling damage, our one-shot potential, and that's ultimately where Bork Prowler feels completely insane and makes the champion really strong as it is on a full AD playstyle. So overall, I don't think there's much to say about this item. It's a very high skill cap item, as well as Eclipse, I'd say, like if you're trying to like play these styles to a higher level. Prowler's Claw is really good. There's a lot of macro, micro involved, a lot of like, animation cancel and like combos you need to learn with this item. I have a guide too if you guys want to check that out, a Prowler's Claw guide. I highly recommend it. And if you really want to take your Renekton to that 1v9 next level, I definitely recommend Prowler's Claw in your playstyle. But again, if you want to watch that, check out my 2 recent guides, which I still hold up to this day. My Prowler's Claw guide and my animation cancel guide. But with all that said, that is basically my thoughts on the rush items. So to quickly go over it, I think Execution is better than Bramble. Bork is better if you want burst damage against tanks, bruisers, or you just want to pivot into other items, aka Bork Rush into Goredrinker, Eclipse, Prowler, whatever you want really. This item is great overall, no matter what. It's just you need to be really careful about your lane choices, because if you can't get this item earlier on, you're going to get completely rolled by people. So just keep that into account. Cleaver, I'd say, is better than Goredrinker, especially if you have an AD champion and you're against... If you have an AD jungler and you're against armor stackers, it is super good for, and you want to be healthier and have like better trading ability. Godrekton is better if you're against squishies and you want to stat check them, have higher stats that end up triumphing their stats. Eclipse is really good if you want to go for fast trades, just have a lane kingdom, dominate your lane as a bruiser, then like pivot into cooldown reduction, go Bork later on, really good for that. And I'd say Prowler's Claw is best if you're against ranged champs or squishy champs too, where you want to dominate your lane, then just roam and use this active to win the game. Alright guys, now that I covered the rush items, it's time to talk about the item combinations. So let's begin with Goredrinker Cleaver here, and I'm going to go into all these other items and give a lengthy description, a lengthy talk about why these are also good. I mean, I kind of already have explained these, but I'll just go into a little bit more detail for people that are also wondering what ideology and maybe skipped into this part of the video. So, Cleaver Gore. As I just talked about my rush items, I do think Cleaver kind of does better than the Goredrinker in various aspects. So I think when you're trying to like pick between these item combos, you want to go either one or like you just want to go one and the other. That's how I feel right now. So if you're going Cleaver, I think it's highly recommended to rush for the Goredrinker. I would not recommend delaying your mythic to third item because I don't think it works as best as other champions. You want that item active spike or like that passive like to really help your team fight at that point. When it comes to the second item, that's where we enter the mid-game. Mid-game, it's all about team fights, skirmishes, frontlining, peeling for carries. macro, like it's essentially the decider of the game. So being able to have an item combination that makes sense together is what will really turn the tides for a game. A Goredrinker style build, you want to be a frontliner. You want to go in, be beefy, be the first one there, tank all the damage, distract the enemies, and then let your team like work on the back, you know? Or you can also use this playstyle to protect your teammates that are the win condition. Your Vayne, your, I don't know, your Samira, anybody that wants to just like, you know, carry, you can protect them, you can shred armor for them with the Cleaver, you could heal, like be a meat shield. Like essentially this item is a perfect team fighting item too. Team fighting build. Really good team fighting macro build, which I think is a lot better in high reloads too, essentially. Yeah, with that being said, I think this combination exceeds extremely well at team fighting. It has really good utility with the armor shred, your cooldowns, allowing for empowered E's, empowered W's, Q healing. Like, essentially, this gives you a lot just from all that. This build also has a lot of health, which is super good too for tanking and fulfilling that role as a frontliner. Your burst isn't as strong, but it's still moderate enough to do a decent amount to squishy champions. You can dive the backline with this and set up as a distraction. Now, what I dislike about this build personally is that you do lack burst damage. Some games, this build simply isn't going to work. There's a lot of health shred in this game, a lot of ways where you can get nuked still, and that's where a Prowler Bork style or some Blair Rune King type playstyle where you can go in and one-shot those champions before they do anything. That's where like this build cannot really achieve that. This build can get kited pretty hard. Now, you do have a lot of cooldown reduction, but it's still not good enough to sustain and keep in the fight without like a ghost combat summoner like Renekton top only used to use, or RTO. The other thing I don't really like about this style is that it can require a lot of gold for what it's used for. Getting that gold can be a little bit difficult in games where we're behind. However, it is probably the safest option you can probably go at the same time, so I don't know if that's really a con, but it's just something to consider about. I guess it is also like easiest to come back compared to other builds because of all the long swords and components. But with that said, I think that's all there really is to talk about Goredrinker playstyle. And essentially that's kind of how you play it. You just go in, frontline, use the active to heal up on other champions, and you just simply stack check your enemy to victory. Next, I want to talk about Jak'Sho, or Jax's shoes, Jax's protein shake, whatever you want to call it. This item is definitely the one I've tested the least, and it has been nerfed quite a bit. However, just by watching people play it and even testing it a little bit, I still can see the power. This item is another good tank alternative where you want a frontline but also have burst damage. So you're kind of like an Omni Bruiser, I guess, if that's even a thing to say. Like you have burst damage, you have tank ability with the tank mythic, which gives a range of tank stats, and it gives you a passive too, which synergizes off your ult, meaning that if you ult and then you're in combat, you're gaining a bunch of armor magic resist to provide more efficiency in your health bonus on your ultimate. So typically, basically, it just makes you really tanky against a lot of people. So anybody that's struggling to shred armor, this item is definitely a lot better. While the Goredrinker style is probably a lot better against people that can't shred your health, if that makes sense. Well, and basically, if you think about it, champions like Vayne, that'll be super good into a champion, like a build like this. Now, a build like this, the armor is going to help a little bit, even though it's true damage, but against assassins, that will struggle a lot more, or maybe they'll be able to do a little bit if they have a Cleaver, but still. You're very tanky, you're really hard to kill, to assassinate, so, and there's like a lot less things to kind of like kill you as well, because you have a mixture of everything. And at this point in the game too, like having 2 items, you're going to be super strong going into every team fight as well. And when we're considering the early game as well, the Blair Rune King helps to snowball the lane, gives us burst damage, so it's super good for that. So if we just quickly go over to the strengths, you have a lot of burst damage, you can tank a lot of different damage sources, synergizes with your kit as well, essentially. It can carry the HP passive, or the armor magic's passive, from the mythic, can be very helpful too. Help you go your Cleaver third item, GAs, Death Stands, whatever it might be what you want to build this, Titanic. It all kind of like works out really well with like extra items like that. What I don't like about this build is that, again, we can get kited. Can be a little bit difficult in some games to get closer. And another game too, it can be difficult getting to that second tank mythic spike. Tank mythics are pretty expensive this season, I feel like, compared to last season. With the Aegis of Legion, can be difficult to build. Stacking ruby crystals can be difficult as well, like in your build style, having like less AD as well. Only letting the Bork kind of carry over the damage, which is fine. But it's not really good for your other spells too, if you consider Renekton, Q, E, W. Like, W gets carried by Bork, but the rest of your abilities don't really have that impact compared to Goredrinker, Cleaver, where you're getting a lot of AD, so all your spells benefit, and the CDR. Which also goes into talking about this con as well. We don't really have any ability haste as much. We end up getting like 20, but for the most part, we're kind of lacking that. And that can be like a really big problem too, if we're considering being kited or being able to use more spells too. Essentially, this build allows us to be, you know, pretty tanky, have a lot of burst damage, but you kind of have to like play it still really good. And it's just another playstyle too. Some people like this, some don't. Some like being a drain tank. Others just like being a meat shield and being more utility based. So this build lacks utility, while this one acquires more utility. So better team fighting build versus better soloist team fighter tank, or like bruiser, I guess you could say, if that makes sense. So again, to explain that if you're confused, this build's better just for like carrying a fight, while this is better for like playing with teammates. So I guess that's the best way to sum it up really. You have this team fighter build and you have this like carry build for yourself, I would say. The next build combination we have is Eclipse into Cleaver or Iron King. So with both of these items, like, I don't know what's entirely better, like, long term, but I do think both of them could be kind of built after one another. As long as you get these 3 items, Renekton is super strong. So we could go like Eclipse into Bork, so we have insane burst damage, insane dueling power, insane skirmisher ability. It's really good against tank champions, people that stack health, armor. Like, essentially these 2 items give us a lot of like power in just dueling, essentially. So in a game where we could sideline a bit more, use our lead there while our team's dominating the map, Eclipse into Bork would be a lot better. However, this little path here does struggle against team fighting. So if we go into team fights, we're very squishy. We can maybe one-shot somebody, but then we get one-shot. We don't have any health. We have a lack of cooldowns, which means we have to play more of our ability usages and make sure they're being used effectively. Otherwise, we're going to end up dying or waiting for our long cooldowns, which in a team fight, second item spike in the game, can be very difficult. However, if we go the Cleaver second, I think this gives us a lot more skirmishing, like, utility as well. So there's a difference here. There's skirmishing power for one-shotting people, and there's also skirmishing power for providing more utility to have armor shred against AD comps, having more CDR for stuns, ease. Like, it depends, like, whatever you can prefer, and, like, whatever's applicable for the game. Against tanks, people stacking armor, Cleaver's probably better, and it also gives us a better team fighting ability too in that stage of the game where we're playing with 2 items. If we're going to dragons or we're going to be team fighting, the CDR, haste, health, it all kind of amounts up, and then we still have our like bursty item in Eclipse, and we can also like take sustained fights as well, like have more success, I'd say, with the Conqueror as well. So it's pretty good in that aspect too. However, with Bork, it's not really there. Like, we can one-shot maybe with PTA. Conqueror could be okay, but I think PTA is better if you're going to prioritize going Eclipse into Bork. But yeah, we kind of lack team fighting ability. So I think to sum it up, Eclipse into Cleaver is good if you want to like play off your team. Have a little tanky in mid-game when like there's some enemies that are strong and you need to like, you know, be in for the long haul. Like, just like go into fights, like sustain, like have all this like type of utility and stats to stat check. While Bork's better to end a fight easier or to split push and apply your lead more in the side lanes. So I guess it's just whatever you're kind of feeling, ultimately. And then by the 3rd item, you just go like one or the other that you haven't built. So if you have these 2, go into Bork. You have these 2, then go into Cleaver, you know? Then you get like a Death Stance, Guardian Angel, or more Malmortius. And those are practically, you know, what we want to be getting. So essentially, in comparison to the other 2 builds, this is more of a carry style hit and run technical build for side laning, or maybe it's just good for like playing against certain champs and just playing off the passive too. It's a skill in itself and a technical ability towards the item, so I guess that's like another consideration for it. Next, we have our Prowler Bork style. This is ultimately probably the best carry style you can play. Bork Rush allows us to beat basically anybody, and then that allows us to pivot into Prowler's Claw, which for mid-game allows us to one-shot anybody in the game. So if there's any fed AD carries, there's any like strong champions, mages, anyone that's hard to get to, you can simply dash in, Prowler's Claw, then full combo and one-shot them. So it's a really good tool for just eliminating a threat. It is a threat in ADC, which it is a very ADC strong meta right now. This build can be helpful for that. If you can nuke that one character, the game is over practically. You can free up a lot of objectives, you can like help your teammates get back in the game, Like, imagine bot lane's fed, you need to use your lead, you roam down, go on the carry, one-shot them, and then you can get dragons, take towers. There's a lot of macro ability there. Like, it's a guarantee as well, because Renekton's damage with this is so high. So with that said, we have the ultimate burst power in the game. Like, we are essentially the strongest character in the game, in damage-wise. Although, the only problem I have with this playstyle, which probably is more so for you guys, is that you need to be mechanically competent. You need to know how to use your abilities. You need to know how to animation cancel. You need to know what cancels with what, like what to do in certain scenarios. Like, it's a very skill-based item. And you can't just use it to Prowler W at all times. Not in high elo anyways. Like, maybe in low elo you can do that, but not in, like, the harder games, of course. So it requires a lot of thought, too, in that aspect. Another thing is, too, is that we are very squishy. So, again, we need to make sure we are eliminating the target. If we misplay, we're dead. It's basically a style which is very feast or famine. We can either go 20 kills with it, or we can go 20 deaths with it, you know? Like, it's just one of them. You need to be really good in a really good mindset, too, to see these players and maximize this. So I'd say it's a better build if you're feeling super confident, you're confident in your Renekton ability, your carry ability as a player. That's like when this item style is super good, and when it's probably super considered compared to everything else. Now, in another game too, you could go Prowler Bork, so if you're against the range matchups or some squishies, Prowler Bork is also good too. So again, it's just kind of like understanding when to go one or the other, pretty much, which is basically, you know, if they're squishies and range, Prowler's cool, because you can reach them easy and snowball easier too. But when they're tankier, have more health, like you want to do more trades, play after passive, sustain damage, Bork is better too. As long as you gain both of these, that's when the style is ultimately strongest. So to quickly recap over all these items, to narrow it down, Goredrinker, this style is good if you want a frontline, be a beefy, utility-based player. So you're playing off your team, you're playing towards your carriers, you have a plan of like being a distraction. It is super good for that. Jak'Sho, while it's similar, is more of a solo type of carry style where you have a Bork, you can take all the damage being absorbed into you in team fights, you can kind of like go towards being a frontliner and a burst assassin. Like, it's kind of like a mixture in between those. It's just like you lack utility and cooldowns, so you have to be really considerate with how you use your abilities as well. The next style is Eclipse. A lot better for side laning or just like using the active, like in a way of like proccing multiple times or sustain damage in dueling. So it's a better dueling style for side lane, but it also can be really good for skirmishes and ending a game early too. That's another way to consider it. Our weaknesses are like general team fighting in certain aspects, but we have to make sure we're applying our damage correctly and also using it the best way possible, which is also comes down to just being technical and more experienced as a player as well. And lastly, for our last playstyle, Prowler School, this is a really good 1v9 style build where you want to get your teammates back ahead. You want to macro, like go to dragons, eliminate the enemy threats. It is always super good for that. We're very squishy, very high skill cap, but there's a lot of guides out there that I've made that can help you with this. So if you want to check my Prowler School guide or animation cancel guide, highly recommend that if you're going to be maining this build. With the item combos being talked about now, I just want to talk over about some of the other items you can build with some of these playstyles. All these items can be applicable into every playstyle, apart from tank items into a Prowler's Claw style. Other than that, I'm going to be explaining it and when you can go each of these. So Cleaver, already talked about this. You can build this as a third item or a second item in any build. This item rather gives you lots of AD, health, haste, moon speed, armor shred. It essentially sets up your bruiser stats, and being that you're playing like a Prowler's Bork, Black Cleaver third is a really good alternative if you just want to be really tanky, have a mixture of stats, be a lot safer too. It's really versatile too, really good in games like where you want to sustain damage, being really tanky, and just help you close out a game a little bit longer too. So it's really good for that, especially with a Goredrinker, gives more haste, or Jak'Sho's, Eclipse. Essentially, it's a really perfect item if you want to be a bit tankier and have a bit more of a safety net into falling back on these stats as well. Trellders is another good item alternative. A lot better with the full AD style builds, so your Prowler and your Eclipse playstyle. Trellders should be bought probably as a third item with Prowlers if you want to snowball super hard. Make sure you're inherently countering all the champions' armor stats, having extra burst damage, have a slow so people can't escape you. It is a super good snowball item. I wouldn't really recommend this on a Jak'Sho's build, or maybe even a Goredrinker build, to be honest, but you can definitely consider that if you want to. But if you also find an argument into going Shrelders or Cleaver, basically Cleaver if you want to be a bit more tankier, and Shrelders if you want to just like shred someone and blow someone up instantly. The reason you consider this more is because the Shrelders pen procs instantly on your first attack, while Cleaver has to stack that. So it's more of a stacking item, like more like, it has more ways to be used. You can use it to protect your teammates and shred armor in the backline, or you can use it to like 1v1, duel people, lower the armor over time. Some games it's not really that great though, because you do want to just one-shot the person without any stacking. So that's where Shrelders comes into. So if you want to one-shot someone, keep being a threat towards squishes, Shrelder third is definitely a good option for that. Next item, Death Stance. This can be built third, can be built fourth, can be built anywhere. This item did get nerfed, the haste did get taken away, and the additional healing get from killing a champion. But overall, that's not what made the item like that strong. What made the item strong was the passive, which you take 15% less damage over time as a bleed. So once you're in a fight, the damage is stored, and then it ticks over time. You take that damage as a true damage instead. So if you take 100 damage, instead that'll be stored into 100 damage at a slower rate, and you take 50% less damage instead through that time, but it ticks down. So this item is really good against a lot of AD comps, games where you want to stat check, just be a bit more of a bigger problem against ADs, so you're like more unkillable towards those champions. So any comp where there's a lot of AD champs, like it is super good alternative, third item, and I guess that's really much else to say. I still think it's a good item personally. I mean, the build path, pretty bad, but once you get this item as like a bruiser and you're against a lot of AD champs or fighters, it is certainly a good counter item towards those. So for a build like a Prowler as well, you could go something like this. Potentially really good too. Or if you're going Goredrinker, build it third or fourth. Just anywhere really. If you go with Jak'Shos, I'd recommend Cleaver then Death Stance personally, because you get more health out of the Cleaver and more utility to help you from the weaknesses it already has. And with Eclipse, just build it like fourth item personally against AD. I think that's like your best point of building it. Next, we have more Mortius. This item is now the counterpart of Death Stance. So basically, same knowledge applied. This item is really good into your AP comps. So anything like an Evelyn, Elise, anything with high AP damage that's fed, you want to build this item to counter them. Because it has a high-ish AD ratio too, your AD that you're building as well with this becomes really strong. So that's like another good point to also be building this. So again, we could build it third, fourth, basically whenever. It's just a good item to consider when you're against like high AP and you want extra AD. I also recommend that this item's probably better built as a full AD playstyle, because you get to use the AD ratio a lot better than the tank styles. So you can build it with Gore, but don't build it with a tank mythic. I think you're better off going with Force of Nature, which I should include now, which I sneakily will do into this part of the builds. So there we go as well. But yeah, just build more into like AP essentially. That's like when it's really good and allows you to have more like turnover power as well against them. They use their full burst combo, your shield procs, and you get a bunch of lifesteal too while being on top of them. So that's when it's like really strong. It says Omnivamp here, but it's actually lifesteal from how they changed it. So that's like a consideration too. Next, we have Chainpunk Sword. I think this item is a lot better for your bruiser and tank styles against healing reduction. So essentially, you just kind of finish off like third item if you need it, like just for team fighting, have an extra damage against the enemy healing. And that's essentially all there is to really say about it. Nothing really else. Just build it against like high healing comps. Really good item just to have at the moment. Build it like third onto your last item. Just any point then if you're lacking healing reduction. Titanic is a pretty good item to have in your tankier styles. So the Jak'Sho and Goredrinker styles, you can build this anywhere from third item onwards. So because you're getting like health benefits from all your items, that's going to be converted into AD. So typically with a high AD style, you can see yourself getting up to about 60 to 70 extra AD if you're lucky with an overgrowth full build. So it's pretty good for that. Just extra wave clear too. And if you just want to be a bit more of a bruiser. So definitely consider that as well if you just like being a bit more of a tank and want more tank stats. I personally prefer going like Bork Jak'Sho, Cleaver, Titanic. Or you could go like Cleaver, Goredrinker, like a Titanic, or maybe even a Sojin if you want that. Not a big fan of it, but yeah, you could do something like that essentially. Sterix is really good if you want to just like stack more health. So again, I think this item's a better fit into a Goredrinker because you're already getting a lot of health and AD, so it kind of adds to that whole build style of that. Jak'Sho, you can also build it with, but I think it's a little bit better with Goredrinker. But it's just based on what you want. This item is really good against AD and AP, so if there's a lot of threats on both sides, you can build this. Just make sure you don't have a All-Mount Mortius because the passives do not stack. So just consider it then. And I'd only say to build this for third item or fourth item onwards if you just want more like burst prevention. And the AD scanning through the game will also come in a lot later anyway, so that's typically when it's a lot better as well. Next item, and kind of like one of my least favorite options, is Ravenous Hydra right now. This item got nerfed pretty heavily since the re-release of it, like the update on this item. It was like 85 AD, I think, and it could give you like up to 105 AD, I think, or maybe it was like 75, I'm not sure. It had Omnivamp too, I think, and they just like changed it completely now, and it's a lot of gold. 3,400 on this item. Not really a giant fan, doesn't really appeal to me as much, so yeah, I don't know. You could build this with Goredrinker, maybe like last item on a Prowler's Claw or like AD style, but I don't know, I think it's a waste of gold personally. I'm not a big fan, but some people might just like the whole effects of that. Some people kind of get off to that, so I mean, it's whatever you prefer at the end of the day. I just think Titanic's a better option for a bruiser. Maybe Ravenous is better for full AD playstyles, but not really my likely choice to build of how expensive it is and how volatile this item is too, because if you die, you lose all the stacks on lifesteal. So that as well loses effectiveness on the item itself. Next item, I have Mortal Reminder. This, again, is probably a lot better for full AD styles if there's a lot of healing. Instead of going your Chainpunk Sword, you can pick up the Mortal Reminder, which I think is a lot better than Sheralda's, if you need to only cut down healing. However, for Pure Burst and just like Haste, I think Sheralda's probably edges it. However, if you crit on this item, it probably also outdamages Sheralda, so you probably need to just consider that a little bit. It's whatever you prefer. If enemy has lots of healing, build Mortal Reminder. If they don't, Sheralda's. That's how I kind of really see it, to be quite honest with you. And also, just to clarify, Renekton's W only crits once, so when you're going either of these item choices, you kind of need to crit first on the W to make it really strong, so that's like the only part. And considering that there's not many crit options for Renekton to buy, it's kind of like just a more gimmicky item, if you will, like a Lord Dominic's or Mortal Reminder. Mortal Reminder makes more sense, but I wouldn't say it makes as much with Lord Dominic's, which is a gimmick item. And speaking of Lord Dominic's, this item is kind of good if you want a for fun build. You want to have extra damage, the crit damage, armor pen. Really fun build if you like full AD and just want to have a little bit more damage. You could go like Prowler, Bork, Lord Dominic's, like Ravenous and something else like that. And then have like lots of burst damage. The only thing that isn't really good like this is the Giant Slayer passive, which goes against your ult. So you can't really ult with this ability because you end up losing the effectiveness from the passive. So again, if there's lots of tanks you want to for fun build, just build this item as well, I guess. Next item we have Form Mail. I think this item is a lot better when you're weak-sided, meaning that if you're behind and you're going like a Goredrinker or something defensive, that's where Form Mail is probably a better choice compared to like any other item. So you could go like Goredrinker, Form Mail against AD, or like maybe like later on in the game, anything with lots of on-hit and AD. So I think that's like when it's good. Not the best choice, but it's a lot better if you just want to like a tank defensive option later on. That's also kind of easy to obtain with the Bramble Vests and Giant's Belts. Another consideration we could have for like tankier styles is Gargoyle Stoneplate. I never really get to build this item so much because of how expensive it is, but if you do get to build this, you have so much stats in this. 60 armor, 60 magic resist, 15 haste, an active that makes you super tanky. It seems really good on paper, however, by the time you get to build this item, which is typically last item, you need lots of health to really benefit from it. And a lot of champions have lots of abilities or items to kind of counter this, so it's kind of on my lesser wanted options. But again, if there's lots of burst and people aren't really countering towards that, Gargoyle Stoneplate is really good on your Jak'Sho and your Goredrinker playstyles overall. So it's just another consideration that you can build this last item if you want to be a bit more tankier and kind of go into that the narrative of being a frontliner as well. Another option that's going to surprise a lot of people is Zhonya's Hourglass. This is probably becoming one of my favorite items at the moment to try out on Prowler style. This item is probably exclusive only for this style, just due to the fact that it allows us to stasis. Meaning that we can block damage, we can go in, use our combo, stasis, and then like disengage. And being that we get a lot of armor out of this and ability haste, it kind of makes it pretty nice. Now, the ability power doesn't really matter. I think it's giving us like, I think it's barely giving us like 1 damage or maybe 8 damage. I can't really remember. Like extra. So it's kind of underwhelming, but again, it's a really strong item in high reload. I would only say if you're a really experienced Renekton player and you want to try out something different, I recommend trying out 3-in-1s and I think his name was Nana's like style of Zhonya's Hourglass. So I think that's like when it's really good. Like if you're a high reload player and you're more experienced. So the idea of this is you get Prowler, Bork, Shrelders, and you go Zhonya's. Or you get Last Whisper, which 3-in-1 told me, and then you go Hourglass. So you have all your burst damage, and then the stasis in the mid game to late game fights is going to be based on how you play. You can full combo, stasis, wait out abilities, and then go back in. Or use it as a way to bait out abilities and then win the fight. So it's really a strong combo, just having a stopwatch too on a style like this. But it's really high skill cap, and I think it requires a lot of work to make work as well in the long term of things. But if you want to see more of that, I recommend 3-in-1 Warrior or watching me play with the item, because I'm starting to learn it, but I think he's a lot better than me with it. So definitely give out 3-in-1 Warrior a check, because he's a really amazing streamer and Renekton player, probably the best in NA right now. So yeah, little shout out from me. So yeah, check him out. The next item that I want to talk about too with these builds is Knight's Vow. So Knight's Vow is an item that you want to play when you're weak-sided. It is by far the most cheapest item, and it's also the most effective item when you're behind. Some players, when they're playing Renekton, just can have bad games. Renekton's either very feast or famine, like I've already mentioned, so if he's behind, it is really hard to do a lot. So the best thing you can do is just have so much utility that you can win a game off that. So things like a Cleaver, Anathemas, Knight's Vow, these are solid options into peeling for your teammates and having a bit of extra stats just to survive, and also just make them a bit more tankier. So if you're severely inting really badly, you can go like Goredrinker Mythic, or like, I don't know, Jak'Sho if you want it first, which I don't recommend. You can go the Knight's Vow after that and just be a bit more tankier and kind of just provide that more utility for your teammates to pop off. So it's a good item if you're behind, but ideally not where we want to be. And lastly, in these other item lists, I think Force of Nature is also super good against APs, and I didn't mean to leave it last here, but it's more so just like, I kind of forgot to add it, as you can see here, just left it there. But this item is a good alternative to full AP comps where there's a lot of sustained AP damage. It's a better item than Mormal Mortius, which favors into lots of burst damage. So if there's things like a Cassiopeia, things like Veigar, things that can spam lots of abilities that are AP and could shred all the time, Force of Nature is really good with that. And the fact it gives 70 magic resist and even more, and damage reduction from magic damage, like when you stack it, it's just absolutely crazy. So typically in tankier styles or games where there's lots of these like conditions, this item kind of triumphs the Mormal Mortis in my opinion. You can go both, but it kind of depends if you need to or not. If there's a full AP comp, then why not? But if there's like some champs that are just strong at other things than the other, like overall damage or burst damage, that's why we consider like either of these options for the scenario. Next, I want to talk about some champions into AD comps. So this kind of section, like here, we'll kind of go into like going against AD and also AP. And I've already explained it, but I'll just quickly go over it as well, just as a little bit of just like some food for thought. So against AD comps, again, we've already explained that boots are super good, so it's kind of a no-brainer. Death Stance is really good too for the passive and the fact we have lots of armor to play around with, making us pretty unkillable. And it also kind of counters Armor Pen and Health Shred due to the fact that we're storing it over time. And being that we can store that damage in and we get a kill, it completely refreshes the damage you've taken and heals instead. So it's a really good item for that, to keeping longer in the fights. Another item that you could potentially go is Gauntlet, but I haven't really tested this so much, so I don't really have a lot of insight, but it could be good as like Bork into Gauntlet against full AD. So it could be something to try. You can also lower the damage of it, slow. There's some more food for thought that you could try it out if you wanted to, but I don't think you really need to. I don't know, it's just, I'm not sure. I'm just kind of sharing with you guys that it could be good in full AD comps specifically. Randuin's Omen is also good. I could have mentioned it here, but I thought I'd just leave it in this section. Randuin's is really good against high crit damage. Your Yasuo's, like Samira's, like just crit ADCs, like Trendemirs. Really good third item choice into countering them. Or maybe even second item if you're behind. So if you're like losing in lane to a Trendemir, could go Goredrinker into Randuin's. That could be extremely really good too, and it's got really good utility for the active, so it allows you to come back and also counter these champions preemptively as well with the active, giving your team a lot more chances to win a fight as well because you bought this item. Another item I want to talk about too is Deadman's. It's not my favorite item, but if you did want to go like Prowler Bork and you wanted some moon speed or some like tanky bruiser item, Deadman's can be really good for that, I feel like, because it allows you to gain to range and also have some armor on hit damage on your first hit. I think it's a lot better than having it on a Goredrinker, personally, like type of build. So if you're going to go Prowler and you want a third item that's tanky and defensive, Deadman's could be good for that, but I don't highly recommend it. It's just kind of up to your playstyle necessarily if you want this. And finally, Sunfire Cape. I think it's a lot better on Jak'Sho's rather than any other build. Sunfire allows us to do damage over time, and the only item build that kind of synergizes with that is Jak'Sho's. So having that, we have Bork, Jak'Sho's, we could go Sunfire third, or like build after Cleaver. But I think building it third is probably the best against full AD comps. And it allows us to kind of go in there, go into a fight, proc our Jak'Sho, our ult, and Sunfire Cape damage. So all this AoE damage around us makes us into like a walking incinerator, essentially. So burn build 2.0 or 3.0 at this point. So it's pretty good as well, the more health you have. And the only build that's really given that is definitely the Jak'Sho and Goredrinker, but I think it makes more sense with a Jak'Sho rather than a Goredrinker personally. But this item definitely should be used when going into comps where there's lots of opportunities to go in and be like in front of the enemy's faces and burning them. So like that's like the only point I see it being good. If it was an AD comp that can kite you, I don't think it's as good as that. I think randoms would be a lot better for the active to slow, or a Deadman's, but not as Sunfire. So Sunfire only good against melee based champions that can't really escape you. The next thing I want to talk about now is against AP champions. So here we have like, you know, Mercury Treads. It's not really for AP, like I said, but it's good against like Tenacity. The next build we have now is for like AP like options, like against like magic damage champions. Mercury Treads obviously good for the little bit of magic resist. It is also good just for the fact of the Tenacity against these champs with stuns. Vagar Cage, Ari Charm, you name it. Leona. Anything that like has AP damage you can stun, pretty good against that. Mormal Mortius, as I've already explained, really good against burst AP champions. So again, any burst mages, it is successfully good against that. And when we're building higher AD. Otherwise, if there's more sustained damage and we're going tankier, I do think the Force of Nature is a lot better and probably outshines it most of the time with a similar price. But I think that's like when you build it. So build this into Cassiopeia's, Rise, anything of that nature that has lots of low cooldowns and sustained damage. Next, we have Silvermare Dawn. Really good item into Mordekaiser. Definitely want to build this into like him when, I don't know, build QSS, and then later on you have all these stats as well for all the AP the enemy team has. So pretty decent option, pretty good. Other than that, it's kind of like not really valued so much, and I think you just better off taking Tenacity and Runes rather than spending 3,000 gold on this item. But again, it's a really good bruiser item against Mordekaiser, I'd say, and that's really about it. And lastly, in this column of items, there's a Spirit Visage. I don't really like this item so much because I think every other magic resist item kind of triumphs it. But with Goredrinker style, I think it is the most appealing because you have like the active, you have like lots of HP, the magic resist can be helpful, the base health regen. I think that's the only time it's really good. And I think it's like better as a last item alternative, typically. So at that point, you probably have Gore, Cleaver, let's think, Sterix, maybe Sojin, possibly, and then like, you just get a Visage. So I think that's like the best point you want to really be getting it. Now, with all that being said, I do want to talk about the overrated or items I don't really recommend it tab of things, because a lot of people kind of ask me, why don't you go Sojin, why don't you go Heartsteel, and I want to make a section dedicated to that so I can give my own insight on this matter too. So, why is Spear of Sojin here? Firstly, I have mentioned that I could build it already, and quite possibly, maybe it's not the worst item, but I think it's overrated, let's say. The fact that it's 3,400 gold, and it's only lowering our abilities only by like a fraction of a second, later on, like in the late game, I don't think it's entirely good for that, but it's a better third spike option compared to like later on in the game. So if you're looking for that like boost in haste and like cooldowns, I think as a third item it could be really good situationally with a soldier like with a Prowler's Bork build or a Goredrinker build. But other than that, I don't know, I think it's just a waste of stats. The only appealing thing on this is the fact that it's giving us 65 AD and the moon speed, which is really good in certain situations, and the health, I guess, too. But you might just be wondering, like, why don't I just go Sherelda's or a Cleaver? I think Cleaver's even better, to be quite honest with you. This is a bruiser item. And it's cheaper as well. 300 gold cheaper for a power spike. I definitely think that's really good. I mean, build components are okay. It's just the BF sword. And trying to build that in a third item stage is pretty difficult because we probably have a core field, Kindle gem, maybe like another item component. So it takes us a lot longer to build compared to a Cleaver, for instance. So that's kind of like why I don't really like it. I know Powder Snow, Korean Renekton player, likes to build it third item with Eclipse Cleaver. But again, I'm not really a big fan, and I think that's just me. But if you want to build that, you can do. I just don't think it's for me, and I think most points it's going to be overrated, personally. The next item is Heartsteel. This item is as gimmicky as the word gimmick entails, so it's just a fun item after all. So you build it just to get a lot of health and stack in the lane. Pretty fun smurf item, I guess, or if you just want to like do some stupid challenge, try and get as much HP as possible. Probably gonna go like Bork, Heartsteel into Titanic, maybe a Grasp or Conqueror. I think that's like your best choices with it. However, trying to get those stacks in the majority of games is barely, like, it's just impossible, it feels like. I feel like Renekton gets kited too easy. The item components are horrid. Like, all these item components are just useless. And you don't get any armor or magic resist. Meaning that a lot of Bork users or Sundra users are just going to completely destroy you. Or, like, any other type of abilities that are really good for that. So, again, I think it's gimmicky at best, really overrated, and I don't really recommend it. I think it's just a fun item that doesn't really work overall, if you ask me. Frozen Heart, I think it can be really good against AD champs, but the use that it has a mana stat could be kind of pointless. Could say the same thing about Zhonya's Hourglass in my justification for it. However, I don't really see myself wanting to build this so often. I feel like I'd rather be building something else that's more useful. Could be good against like on-hit comps that are like AD, not like magic damage per se. Good to slow their attack speed. But again, I don't know, it's just a weird item for me. Lots of armor, but I don't know. I think maybe you sort of build it against full AD comp. You could do that, but again, not really favoring this choice, to be quite honest with you. Next, we have Serpent's Fang. I think the stats on this are kind of underwhelming for a lethality item. You're better off just going to Ghostblade. It is cheaper, and it does give you a lot of shielding reduction against champions, but Renekton already has like an empowered W for that. So I don't really see the point building this because it's already built into our kit. Now, you could argue like, you know, it's still really good for everyone else, but my goal is single target damage. So if the enemy shields and I like Prowler W or something like that, I'm going to one-shot them to begin with, and I'm going to break through that shield instantly, unless they have more shields. But still, most of the time they have one shield, so I think the Serpent's Fang usage is kind of underwhelming, and it's not really doing anything, and it's a waste of a slot. And again, why do I want to build an item when I have Power W that has a instant shield deletion in my kit, you know? So that's kind of like how I feel about this one. Next, we have Radiant. If you told me about this last patch, I would have said it's pretty good for utility and just giving your team like better stats. But now that it's been nerfed, while it still relatively works the same, I just don't think it's really giving you much. It's just increasing your health. It's not giving your teammates haste, and I don't know. Maybe it's okay if you just want to be more supportive, but I don't know. I don't think it's that good now. I think for the additional healing it was giving before and the CDR, it was more impactful, but not anymore. I think it's kind of pointless, and you're better off playing a tank champion with us, like a Zac, Ornn, something of that nature, personally. Next, we have Axiom Arc. I think this item is terrible. Why do you want to build this? Just to lower your ultimate cooldown? Your ult cooldown already gets lower later on in the game with the CDR you have in your kit. And yeah, I mean, that's basically all there is to say. I think it's a troll item, and you shouldn't build it. Collector, another item to add in the gimmick list of things, like LDR. LDR has a usage, but Collector, I mean, it's just like a fun item that you can pair with it, I guess. And if you're just super fed, you can build it third with a Bork Prowler. And really, that's about it. Terrible item other than that, but maybe it's fun. So if you want to build it, you can build it, I guess, but don't build it seriously. Next, we have Hullbreaker. Hullbreaker was supposed to be pretty good, in theory, with Renekton, because you'd have, like, a lot of stats to duel people with, but it's like, there's just better champions with it. Like, and you want to get items that spike overall, like a Blair Ruin King, Cleaver, things that give utility or purpose into one-shot and stuff. Hullbreaker doesn't really do either of that, because it's a soloist item that requires you to be in side lane, and I think side laning on Renekton is pretty troll if you're only staying in one lane. Obviously, it's good to pressure lanes and then roam, but other than that, I don't think it's super good, and I think it's overrated and pretty terrible for him. I think it's better on your champs like Fiora and Jax, personally, and Renekton is nothing like them. And lastly, we have Trinity Force. Trinity Force, well, I guess we could say Sunderer too, if I just put Sunderer in this column. So, Sunderer and Trinity Force, both of them have a Sheen active, both of them require you to use a spell and use it, but it's not like that strong, and I think with Renekton having to combo slower with his items doesn't really work. Eclipse again is different because the passive and the stat value. With these, the components are absolutely terrible. Corfield Sheen Kindle Gem, it kind of hurts to build, and I feel like our power kind of derails a little bit into this, and I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me. I think this is bare items. It works on I think max health as well. Like, it just seems like a really weird and gimmicky item. Like, really slow, really clunky, having to combo in a certain way, and most champs will end up doing more DPS to us because of that reason. So that's kind of why I don't like it. And Renekton's not so good at like sustained fighting in a way. So I don't know. I don't think it's that great. So if we're gonna like combo against a Jax and like try to use the active as much as possible, we're gonna end up losing compared to him because he has his W that's a low cooldown, Qs, E's. I think it's just like kind of pointless, and it's not really that good, to be quite honest with you. And with Trinity Force, I mean, it could seem good later on in the game, but again, I don't think Renekton wants to stay in battle too long. He wants to one-shot, or he wants to like be full frontline. This item is kind of like one foot out the door. You want to fight and duel, but at the same time, you kind of lose doing that. So, you know, later on in the game where this item could be more impactful, it's also not as good because other champions just outperform you. And yeah, I think just looking at stats and items like Heartbound Axe, Sheen, like, nah, I don't think so. And I guess one item I forgot to talk about is Stridebreaker. Stridebreaker you could play, but I don't know. I think this item needs changes. I think it's just like, it's like if you're bored of Goredrinker, you can buy Stridebreaker for the slow, but then you lose the healing and like some bruiser stats. Like, I don't know. I think this item is also like kind of meh. I think you just want to like build Goredrinker mainly. And the attack speed could be nice, really good like carry item earlier on in the game, but I don't know, I'm not a fan of this anymore. I think it's only good if like I want to change up and I'm bored, but still, I think it needs changes if you want this item to be good on Renekton. So yeah, that is basically my item guide. I am really tired now having to narrate this for 1 hour 40, I think it's been so far. So yeah, this video might be a lot to comprehend, but I'll try and timestamp it. I'll try and like leave as many points and like edits as possible to make it entertaining and whatnot. And yeah, I hope this spew of knowledge has helped you guys have an understanding when to build items. If you want to go a certain playstyle, try it one at a time. Don't just build everything all at once. Try to really learn the item style, because at the end of the day, Renekton is all about like adapting. If you can adapt to the game, you're unstoppable. End of it, because you have so much more tools in your toolkit. You're able to like encounter every scenario and have a backup plan for it. If you're against like a fed carry, Prowler's Bulk's good for that. If you need to carry a team, if you need to frontline protect your team, Goredrinker's good for that too, or Cleaver, or maybe Jak'Sho as well. Like, there's just so many ways you can play Renekton. I just love it. Like, my 5.5 million mastery points on Renekton isn't for nothing. Like, I really love this champion. I love being able to play all these builds, styles, love being able to talk about all these items. Like, it's just absolutely amazing to, like, have this champion that can do that. Like, there's a lot of champions in this game that can only build one item, and it's crazy, and I can see why they're bored. But with me, I love this because I can build all these different items and just have fun. At the end of the day, That's what League should be about too. Just having like many different ways to play a champion and just go all out with it. But yeah, there's not much else to really say other than thank you for watching this video. If you watched all of it, thank you for just skipping to parts or like checking things out. Just thank you for watching and supporting my channel as well. There'll be a lot more guides. They will take more time to make though, and this took some time to make overall. And yeah, that's kind of how it will be, but I only strive for the best content, and I'm going to keep providing that for my community. With all that being said, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for the likes, subs. If you want to check out my stuff, check out my Discord in the description below, my Twitch. Just, you know, check all my links out below and my TikTok that I'm posting regularly. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video or my stream. So thank you very much for watching and peace out. Have a good one.